upon the Canadian people, followed by the rest of the world. An international terrorist masquerading as a domestic issue has now become a sworn enemy of America. Conceived in a 3-night excursion in Havana, Cuba, was the first variant of its kind. A saboteur who has punctured and infiltrated the very Western values North America has only ever known. It's part of a grandiose scheme following the blueprints coming out of Davos, Switzerland. The World Economic Forum sent their young global leader, their best, their henchman, their lackey, their deal breaker to the country of Canada.
Revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for Her Majesty, so help me God.
And mandate fascism that the world has never seen, from one Cuban dictator to now an international despot. We will finally learn the true origin of one of Canada's most notorious Prime Ministers. Justin Trudeau is the whore of Havana.
Canadian Patriots, Real Deal Media. Look what's happening here. We're live from Toronto. They said there'd be a few hundred truckers. There's probably like thousands of just people waiting. Look at this. Look on the side. There you go. Look at all those trucks. Beautiful. Woohoo! Oh, Canada. People on the side. Look at all the people on the side. No media. Where's the media? Beautiful sign. Look at that.
That's a minority.
You guys, we're all freezing our tuckuses out here. But I'm live. Aaron Cates, Canadian Patriot, Real Deal Media. We've got lots of stuff happening. It's a celebration.
Well, ignorance was bliss. Everything seemed great. We thought we lived in the freest nation in the world. No one even talked about the Prime Minister at dinner, at lunch. It wasn't even a topic. We didn't talk a lot of politics. And I remember as a kid, I would be driving around on the Gulf Islands with my father, and he would be listening to the CBC. So I'd hear a little bit of politics, but I mean, as a kid, half the time I probably didn't even know who the Prime Minister was because there was just no problems in life. And now most of us that weren't political before are highly political now.
We've never really experienced true war in any real sense. We've never really experienced the danger of invasion. Canada is surrounded on three sides by an ocean, and on the other side with the biggest military on the planet. So growing up, I really had a true sense of safety. I didn't worry about walking down the street, being kidnapped, killed, assaulted, sexually assaulted. I feared almost nothing unless you walked in like the really bad parts of towns, which there were not many of. You know, all things considered, it was safe, it was productive, it was happy, if you want to think of it that way. We didn't feel a lot of pressure from the outside world.
Immigration has always been what Canada is. I grew up in a neighborhood that was mainly Chinese. Then I grew up after that in a different neighborhood that was mainly East Indian. So being multicultural, I grew up with that.
And almost everybody that was around me was very like, hey, we're all here, we're all Canadian, it's all good, right? And I think that that's been the general sentiment of how Canadians see themselves.
But because we have such a huge country, it wasn't a big deal. And prior to Trudeau, Canada did a really good job of just bringing everyone together. We all went to school together. Everyone had friends of every race. So, yeah, there was a lot of immigration, but you grew up in it. My era, you don't even notice.
There was a beer commercial that literally 20, 25 years ago that probably did more for Canadian patriotism than anything the government has done ever. And the reason for that is that we have a very subdued nationality and national pride.
People were immigrating here because, they knew that we were one of the most free countries. The sky was bluer. There was a lot less chemtrailing going on.
Look at that, X's in the sky. We got one, we got in the background there, chemtrails. Okay, so we got an X. Whoa, nice X. X's and O's everywhere. This is pretty normal. I'm sure they're just spraying us because they love us. Look at that, man. So I don't know what's going on, folks, but this is just not normal. So growing up, I remember the weather was definitely colder. When I was a kid, we used to come out, as soon as we came home from school, we'd play hockey in the middle of the street. All the kids were out there. Nobody was on their video games. It was cold, didn't matter. All the kids were on the streets playing hockey. 6, 7 o'clock rolled around. Dinner time, all the kids went home. Everyone was respectful. There wasn't as many people definitely in the cities in Canada, but it definitely felt Canadian. I remember 1988, the Olympics was in Calgary. The Canada hockey team was playing. Every Canadian was glued to the radio, glued to the TV. Didn't matter where you were.
Chuck, he's tied up on the play, couldn't get the shot off, and Kamienski cleared it into center ice, and Malinowski back to get it.
Life was actually great. I actually didn't complain about government. I didn't complain about our politicians as much. I was asleep like pretty much everyone else. It was just awesome. Step in the fun today. Step in a world of play. Step into good times and no bus don't shop.
If you're a person on the go, write down this number. It's the key to traveling with. It's Casino Taxis number 4296666.
In conclusion, most Quebec students are about as interested in federalism as they are in lawn bowling. Nonetheless, the debate is on at 31 colleges among 74,000 students. Arguing the federal case at Collège Jean Brébeuf today was the son of its most famous alumnus.
Le Canada ne chie pas sur le Québec.
Justin Trudeau and his team were lonely voices for the Confederation. Lonely and unpopular. Later, with a trademark family shrug, the young Trudeau said he doesn't much care what his peers think of his views.
Everyone's got peer pressure at this age. I mean, there's pressure to smoke, there's pressure to do all sorts of stuff. And I've never been affected by peer pressure. There's pressure to smoke, there's pressure to do all sorts of stuff. I've never been affected by peer pressure.
cannabis as a form of medicine, I became a patient, self-diagnosed patient, right? And it was working. The violent tendencies, the fighting, the aggressiveness stopped it dead in its tracks. I want to spread the joy, so I started selling it, right, for profit. And what a business that was. And that one, I started that in 1989, 1990, and it turned into West Coast, East Coast smuggling. And little did I know, it would ultimately put me behind bars. So I ended up spending so far in counting, even up to today, almost 3 years in prison for cannabis related offenses and over 28 years of my life on some type of conditional sentence. And I'm on a conditional sentence now as we speak for cannabis. I wanted to get the conservative government out in 2007 because people were going to jail for something that was harmless. Okay. They didn't want to control it. They didn't want to sell it. They made it very, very, very illegal. Taboo. You get caught with cannabis, you're going to prison, right? So I stopped voting for the conservatives, and in came a guy named Justin Trudeau.
Admission that he tried pot, but not much.
I have been in my past a very rare user of marijuana. I think 5 or 6 times in my life that I've taken a puff.
Trudeau says one of those puffs was about 3 years ago when he was an MP.
Trudeau seemed like a really nice guy. He was speaking about how people shouldn't be in jail for marijuana charges. I agreed.
The legalization of marijuana is not an event, it's a process. And as we do that, we will continue to move forward and be responsive to challenges that come up and opportunities that come up. But I need to reiterate the importance of moving forward as planned this summer on the legalization and control of marijuana.
And his famous saying was, a Canadian's a Canadian's a Canadian. And I really like that saying,
Trudeau Sr. So one of the things that he was famous for was that the Canadian Constitution wasn't actually in Canada. So it was actually in British Parliament because we're still more or less a British colony. We have a Crown Corporation. We have the Queen's representative or the King's representative now. And part of our parliamentary system is the Governor General, which is essentially subservient to the Crown. Fact is that we were connected to the British Crown. And one of the things that he did was he flew over there and said, hey, we want a constitution. Grabbed it and came back. And that was like, a point of pride for Canada, right? But Trudeau was also senior, was also apparently a communist. Didn't really know that until recently. But the fact is that he is of the 2 times that martial law has ever been declared in Canada. One was Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau. And the second was his Trudeau's attempt during convoy when, there was bouncy castles in the streets.
A few hundred trucks! Those are a few hundred trucks! Few hundred trucks! I'm not an extremist!
The family has a very authoritarian tint and has a kind of a long history of doing authoritarian things. And there is people that remember that era fondly, and there's others that remember that era very not fondly. One of the things that he did was try to destroy the West in various different ways. Now, I'm not as well read on that particular situation as some other people, so probably best to ask somebody else about that stuff. But the fact is that he was a very recognizable name. And even though Justin Trudeau Jr. has no actual political experience and is the sum total of his skills were being a drama teacher and apparently molesting a kid, silencing them with money, I guess that gives you the skills necessary to be a Canadian politician these days.
It really started to amp up when Trudeau took power. We thought that civil rights meant a lot to our government. I didn't even bother following politics because we were free. The only thing that bothered Canadians the most was that we were highly taxed. But besides that, we thought we lived in a free nation and we thought that would last forever. Little did we know that the guy who was going to offer people to be able to smoke weed, get released from jail on weed charges, we thought that was a good thing. He did yoga. He was for women's rights. He was for gay rights. We thought he was just a run-of-the-mill good guy. We had no idea what was coming for us.
Who is Justin Trudeau? Where did he come from, and who is he working for?
Canadians feel Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should resign in 2024.
His ties to the globalists predate, many would say, his own tenure as Prime Minister of Canada.
Thought he was just a run-of-the-mill good guy. We had no idea what was coming for us.
I stopped voting for the Conservatives, and in came a guy named Justin Trudeau.
The World Economic Forum and their young globalist leaders of tomorrow, all their cadets, a majority, mainly, rule the country of Canada throughout the Parliament and make up nearly all of the Liberal Party. Straight from Klaus Schwab's own blueprints himself.
But there are two countries in the world now in which the young global leaders have emerged. Tell us just a bit about that in terms of the governance.
Yes, actually, this notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. And I have to say, when I mention our names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the world economy.
Diversity fosters new ideas. New ideas generate the experimentation needed to make the most of the fourth industrial revolution. Industrial revolution.
The amount and the level of treason far surpasses anything of the last century, yet it's setting the standard for the 21st century. As fascism of old, mainly pertaining to single countries, now exist on a global scale. Just who is Justin Trudeau? And why Justin Trudeau?
I know that half of this cabinet are for our global leaders of the world.
Kirk Reese is a current, some might say former, but nonetheless a whistleblower who saw some very nefarious things during his time in the forces and told his commanders at the time of the malfeasance that he witnessed, of the fraudulence, the crimes, you name it. What you're about to hear is a epic story of great proportion of survival, determination, perseverance, and due diligence to being loyal to the oath that Kirk Reese took.
I'm from a small town in northern Saskatchewan. I was born and raised there. My father and mother were excellent people, excellent parents. They always worked hard. They taught me how to work hard. They made sure all my sisters and myself got educated. I wanted to give back to my community, so I joined the Rangers. So did my father. And the Rangers in Canada is we basically teach survival. We do rescues for people that are lost. Our main goal since 1947 is protect Canadian sovereignty and basically, help Canada. I noticed right off the bat that paperwork wasn't quite what I was used to because I work for big companies, so you always have to make sure your paperwork's good. You're not going to get accused of anything. Well, they left everything so open that I was worried that I was going to be implemented in fraud. I found a bunch of inconsistencies with our cash payments, and I didn't like them, so I reported them. And basically, they said, "Well, who's complaining?" Well, I said I am, but as members of my patrol, that were like I had 10 guys working for me, and they were like, "How come we're signing all these blank sheets? It's too open to fraud." I'm like, "Well, I agree, But there was a lot of money going through there, and I talked to my sergeant major. I said, "What's with all of us signing all these blank sheets?" He said, "Well, Kirk, we got a lot of money. Sometimes I got to divvy it up here and there." And I was like, "Well, I think it's leaving things open for fraud," and I directly told him that. And he said, "Well, Kirk, you're as good as 10 Rangers. Here's $4,000 in cash." And the government had been seizing all my money, all my accounts, so it was quite a bit of money for me. And I'm like, well, that was what I needed to prove about the fraud. So he gave me $100 bills, and I went straight from his office to Jim Shearson's office, and Jim says, "Are you happy with that?" Because he knew I took the money. I was like, "Yeah, that's fair." He didn't know I was going to go on the Ranger page and say, "Look, I got paid way too much money for this exercise." So I complained. Right after I complained, I was immediately suspended for a year. Under the reporting of wrongdoing in the military, if you complain, you can't face reprisal. Well, the same day I reported it is the same day they released me and gave me a year suspension for trying to do the right thing. And after that, as things got more and more, they sent a warrant officer up to talk to me, and he says, "Kirk, you're going to have to quit." And I was trying to quit. I was going to quit, but as soon as he said I had to quit, I said, "Well, I'm not going to," because now I knew how serious it was. And he said, "Think of your family, think of your kids, think of your babies." They just had a new baby girl then, and my son was 5. I says, "I'm thinking of them. I'm thinking of everybody's families and babies and kids, because this is wrong." And it's, Jim Shearson said that his wife was running for the Liberal Party. I'm like, "What does that have to do with the Rangers?" He said, "Well, I have to be in charge of the Rangers because it'll look better on, for her to become a politician." I'm like, "What does that have to do with rescuing people?" Well, all of a sudden, it went from rescuing people to what's popular with CBC, and I couldn't have anything to do with that. So then all of a sudden, I'm getting threats saying I'm going to be killed by drug dealers, and there's a lot of murders in Laurent, Saskatchewan, more than anyone could ever admit. Like, it's probably the highest murder capital in Canada. I realized a lot of the Rangers weren't in it to save people; they were in it for the money, And then I realized, like Jimmy Shearson told me that, "Kirk, my wife's running for the Liberal Party." I'm like, I couldn't care less. What does that have to do with rescuing people? He says, "Well, I have to be the patrol commander because it looks better on paper for CBC when they interview us and stuff if he's there." And so they got his wife in the Rangers, they got his daughter in the Rangers, they got their friends in the Rangers. Extreme nepotism. These guys had no skills, and people were going to die. And I told them that, but either way, next I'm getting these threats, so I had to leave Saskatchewan. And reason being is because Tammy Cook Searson became a Liberal nominee, and I realized they're pulling the strings for this because there's so much money and so much power, because she's also in charge of the chemical uranium mine and stuff for hiring and stuff like that for the band. It's a pretty big rabbit hole, but she had to be nominated, so she had to get this. Her people had to, I think it was $200 per nomination to get her in, and so they were just taking the Ranger money that was, because it's all cash, untraceable, and I believe that's how she got nominated. Well, either way, and then I see Trudeau was up there. Everything clicked, and like I was watching CBC interview them, and I was like, they're lying through their teeth. And I actually wrote a letter to Trudeau saying, look, you have a corrupt band chief that's running as a Liberal nominee to the Green Light Park Committee. And they actually responded, do you think it's going to help? I have letters returned to me saying, thank you for your service from Trudeau, but your complaints fall into the purview of Harjit Sajjan, the Minister of National Defense. And then all of a sudden I get a letter from him saying the same thing. Well, we'll look into it. Thanks for your time and consideration. We'll look into it. Well, no one ever looked into it. Thank God she didn't win the election, but Trudeau still is like they still associate he was up there for the Truth and Reconciliation. Well, they're just laundering money up there like crazy, but they know they can't get caught.
The National Truth and Reconciliation Day holds space for every Canadian, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to grapple with this part of our history, to honor those who lost their lives, and to think about ways each of us can support survivors and be better allies. Scars don't heal overnight, and trust can take a long time to rebuild.
Things started to change when the scandal started to happen. It was one scandal after another. Okay, there was the Trudeau's cash for access scandal. There was the Abby Khan vacationing scandal. There was the SNC Lavalin scandal. There's so many scandals. Government that was sitting before him, the Conservative government, they got ousted over $18 a glass for orange juice on a plane. Okay, and it was nothing compared to what this guy was doing, and he's still sitting in power. Scandal after scandal. And there's so many scandals, they're buried on top of one another. It's hard for people to remember.
He was a good-looking kind of prime minister, and I kind of thought, you know what? Okay, maybe it's kind of good to have a good-looking kind of prime minister for Canadians. It'll put us on a little bit more on the world stage, and we'll get a little bit more attention. So the first time I saw him doing wrong, I would say, was in Syria. I remember the Syrian and ISIS, and he brought over about, I think, was 25,000 Syrian refugees. He just brought them over. They weren't being vetted. And there was other scandals and another scandal and another scandal. So with already in the first 1 or 2 years, he's just already not good in my books. So that's where I would say everything started initially.
It's been a really slow process of trying to wake up Canadians to the absolute psychopathy of Trudeau. They didn't want to believe that he was capable of what he's capable of. But as this agenda it gets pushed to be faster and faster by the United Nations, by the WEF, more and more regular people are saying this is going too far.
In regards to how I connected the dots, well, all of a sudden, Chief Tammy Cook-Searson's running for Trudeau's Liberals, and it didn't take long to figure out, well, this is national security, because they're having fake elections to get me out because I was reporting them for fraud. And in the Rangers, we have to have an election every 2 years for new management, and you're allowed to stay for 2 terms, but then you can't be a second in command or whatever. The reason we have these elections is to stop fraud, because we're dealing with millions and millions of dollars of cash, and Trudeau just went and bought all of the Rangers. There's 5,000 of us brand new Tika 308s. There's a lot of money that went missing there. I pay taxes, I worked all my life, and I see them just getting thrown away, and it bothered me. So I started connecting the dots, and then I actually found out that I was correct. They were stealing. I wrote a letter to Trudeau. They responded, for your service, but it falls into purview. Well, I said I can never go home again, and that's how they respond. We understand you're under a lot of stress. I've never been responded to by anyone in the Canadian government for 5 years. The RCMP came to my house or my ship, and they said, Kirk, you can give us all the information you want. We can't investigate it. It's way above our pay grade. I'm like, well, who do I talk to? It's just all of Canada's politicians are, I've talked to 100 of them. None of them will deal with this because it's career ending. All the RCMP, they come up, we can't investigate. We'll lose our pensions. Well, I lost everything. They seized every penny I had, leaned my houses, seized up over $350,000 in cash. For what? For me doing what I was supposed to do, and it ruined my life.
So all these things going on, pushing the narrative there, police not really doing their jobs, arresting journalists. We have criminals in our politics, and it's so easy to see it, and they just get scot-free. So the whole system's corrupt, whether it's the healthcare, whether it's the justice system, the political system. there's just really no help until people realize that they just are pushed to the edge.
We're always talking about lawful solutions up here. And those of us that understand the agenda, see what's coming, see what the agenda for Canada actually is by the UN, by the WEF, by China. We realize that most of Canada is owned by China now. Everyone is trying their hardest to first just wake up the politicians. People have been sending all of the information that is completely reputable to as many MLAs and politicians as they can to try to wake them up. Some of them have been awoken. And people are trying to do it lawfully through the courts. Freedom fighters have filled up the courts with great evidence showing all the scams that have been happening. So right now, Canadians are trying to do everything peacefully. Will people stand on a hill and die for freedom? Yes, they will. It's very evident that Trudeau doesn't work for Canada or America.
Let's do this. We got you. We got you. You know what? One more thought, Canada. We also stormed in Normandy, in Judo Beach. We were warriors then, and we're warriors today, our truckers. A few hundred trucks! There's a few hundred trucks! I'm not an extremist! Mr. Trudeau sucked our souls! Soul sucker! Trudeau!
In Canada, capital punishment is a thing of the past. Yet a topic that has re-entered the focus of many Canadians in recent years. Back in 1976, Pierre Trudeau removed capital punishment and replaced it with maximum prison sentences, upwards of 25 years. Since then, the military has prescribed a firing squad for some of the highest offenses, yet even that was removed back in the year 1999, with the death penalty being abolished for highest civilian crimes, and even a firing squad of penalties for the highest crimes within the sedition form. Many Canadians have wondered, what can we do?
Say they can't keep up with the cost of living, according to a new poll. They say they couldn't manage a sudden expense of more than $1,000 if it were to come up.
Thank you. You cannot sing the song in the restaurant. It's by law. What? Randall cannot sing the song in the restaurant. That's the by law. COVID-19. Really? I'm so sorry. Yes, all by law.
What have we become? Those who claim to be saving humanity have lost their own in the process. A flourishing country of the West, the gold standard of Western civilization, and its downward deterrent and downward trajectory, and its downward collapse of society. It's almost a reflection of its morality or lack thereof. Those who are supposed to be protecting us from a terrorist from afar are not protecting any of us. Because if they were, there wouldn't be any homeless, and they would be fighting the very people now, in essence, exterminating and depopulating the world as we know
it. The first time it is in great agreement by many Canadians. What we are witnessing is the highest form of treason that has plagued the North American shores in all of our history.
They bear fundamental gaps and inequities within our societies and between them. As with climate change, those who have the least are impacted the most. That's why last spring, Canada worked with Prime Minister Andrew Holness and Secretary General Antonio Guterres to convene a high-level meeting to discuss how leaders around the world could work together to close these gaps and build a better, more equitable system that works for everyone. The most promising ideas will be taken up within existing IMF and World Bank processes, as well as at the G7 and G20 leaders summits later in the fall. Then, in December, we're going to have the opportunity to meet again to discuss the progress we've made. Because we understand that right now we have to fix urgent problems, but in the long run, we also have to fix the system so that it works for everyone. Eliminate this virus anywhere. We need to eliminate it everywhere. We need to eliminate it everywhere. And we're ready to the end of the those who have the least are impacted the most. Build a better, more equitable system that works for everyone. While scientists work around the clock to develop a vaccine, as governments, we have the responsibility to ensure it'll be distributed quickly and fairly around the world. On Friday, I announced that Canada will provide $440 million to the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility, including $220 million to the Advanced Market Commitment to help low and middle-income countries access vaccines.
Roughly 4 years ago, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, the second in command behind Trudeau, joined the country of Germany to form an alliance to save the World Health Organization. As far back as 2019, the WHO was saved from complete financial disaster thanks to Justin Trudeau. Joining the Germany alliance to save the international world order that was formed for these moments. Following this, the protocol of action by the Trudeau regime was to not only save the World Health Organization, but to then be a financial white knight for the United Nations by giving them billions of dollars with the intentions of ridding the nation states once and for all. UN at the time, who was solvent of financial disasters. A quote from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres: the United Nations is facing the worst cash crises in nearly a decade. The UN, the WHO, soon thereafter were saved. For the following year, 2020, Germany, the WHO, the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, and Event 201 in all their participants staged the great pandemic. The international world order was then saved. The saboteur of North America was in place, put there by the Klaus Schwab International Cartel of Terror. And that is the definition of high treason. His choice, his decision, has been firmly made, as once again, a leader of the West has chosen the wrong side of history. Which is why Justin Trudeau has now sparked the conversation of treason and the consequences for it.
There's a bunch of people that looked into his past and were like, hey, where did this guy come from? Like, who is this idiot? Why is this guy doing all this dumb stuff? they saw that there was a connection between his mother and Fidel Castro. And so they started pulling up pictures in the same way and doing side-by-side comparisons, which turned into a big meme that Trudeau was Castro's son. So it was the memes of the 2017s, 2018s that basically brought that whole thing around. And I find it kind of ironic that our government has demanded all of our DNA and we get all these vaccines and stuff. And I'd really like to see a DNA test with this guy. Is this guy actually Trudeau's son or not?
Yes, the relationship between Canada and Cuba has been going on for a long time. Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was a friend of Fidel Castro at the time when the U.S. was in a nuclear war standoff, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Canada's best friends was Cuba, and it's handed down to the kid, which is Justin Trudeau. Now, the whore would be the wife, Margaret Trudeau. That's his mother. There's rumors that she and Fidel Castro had sex on one of their vacations down in Cuba, and around that time was 1970, and Justin Trudeau was born in 1970, so there's a fine timeline. Now, I've heard other people say, oh no, the itinerary shows this and that, but if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And there's a striking resemblance to Fidel Castro and Justin Trudeau.
Canada has a tremendous amount of experience with strong civil society and how we encourage and learn and hopefully collaborate with members of Cuban civil society will be part of how Canada can be a good friend to Cuba.
Mr. Speaker, under the dictatorship of Fidel Castro, thousands of Cubans were imprisoned, impoverished, and even executed. Our Canadian values of free speech, free thought, and assembly were curtailed and even banned. This is why so many Canadians were astonished that on behalf of them, the Prime Minister described Fidel Castro as a remarkable leader. When the Prime Minister praised Castro, one of the world's worst dictators, what was he thinking?
Honorable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker,
La puta de la Havana está en problemas y madre también. Su papá Fidel Castro es camiones de enemigo, así del día Clashua, amigo de las cadenas, muy feto problemas. La puta de la Habana está en problemas. Oh, Justin Trudeau is really Justin Castro.
Justin Trudeau, the whore of Havana. He didn't become that way just by accident, by just a divine creation, or as we know it in his case, a divine error. No, it took two people. They say it takes two people to tango. Well, it also takes two people to make a red-blooded communist. Well, I stumbled upon somebody, a wonderful researcher who really put it all together, which really gave us this intuitive idea and concept to really look in depth of who makes and who made the whore of Havana who he is today.
Also be Fidel Castro's son? We've all heard the rumors about Justin possibly being fathered by Castro, and I've outlined how that's possible.
And I want to introduce to you now a researcher, wonderful Kara, all the way from Canada. Kara, let's walk us through the origins of what created the Justin Trudeau who we know today.
I would love to. So there's a lot to know about Pierre Trudeau. He actually did 2 terms as the Prime Minister of Canada. So he was in power from like 1968 to 1984. And during his time in office, he did quite a few things. Notably, he married a woman about 30 years younger than himself and had 3 children with her, one of them being Justin Trudeau. And he was the first prime minister ever in Canadian history to move for a divorce from his wife while in office. Quite the legend.
Yeah, that's unheard of. You would have thought that Hillary Clinton would have done that with Bill Clinton, but this is unprecedented, and they don't even look alike. Just thinking about it right now off the cuffs, yeah, that doesn't even remotely.
I personally think that Justin looks a lot like his mom when his mom was young, but I don't really see Pierre in there.
Yeah, I don't see Pierre in there. Definitely, it's not Chris really mixing with me. So yeah, Pierre Trudeau, who was probably a very well received and remembered, love or hate kind of a prime minister of Canada, I'm sure.
He's a pretty polarizing figure.
So how did this all begin? So you have a young, the mother of Justin.
Margaret is her name.
So Margaret is kind of a hippie child. She's kind of a, of the times, free-willing of that era, a pot-smoking, open-minded of alternative lifestyles, kind of a young woman in Canada at that time, correct?
That she was. Before she became Margaret Trudeau, she was Margaret Sinclair. And yeah, she was very much a young lady, just trying to look to get out from under the watchful eye of her parents and have some fun, smoke some pot and live some life. And hey, it was the 60s and the 70s, so.
Yeah, that's kind of my motto too. Smoke some pot and live some life. I can't go wrong with that. It's a winning formula. So she wants to get out of the peculiar situation she found herself in growing up, like many people of that generation, and like many women have done, or young women that is. They see somebody of great stature, structured. He's got some name recognition, money. He's got a car, maybe, and they see a escape, an out. I think that's what she found. Is that correct?
I think that's what Pierre saw. That's what Margaret saw in Pierre, excuse me. Pierre and Margaret actually met on a beach. It was apparently completely random. And she was so young, she was only 18. So Pierre actually asked her parents' permission, is it okay if I call your daughter for dinner? It was very much a formal affair with her parents' approval. So maybe her parents also saw some stability, a well-to-do man who would take care of of their daughter.
Okay, yeah, exactly. They're heading now to Cuba, and I'm jumping ahead. See, I want to go to Cuba.
Hey, no worries, no worries.
I want to go to Cuba. I want to go to Cuba to relive this, just so I can follow the footsteps like a true archaeologist. But so they get together. She gets married at a very young age.
Yes, they
he's an
got
older man.
married. Yes, they got married pretty quickly. They got married in 1971, and they started having children very quickly. And they went on to have 3 sons together. Justin Trudeau was born first. He was a Christmas baby of 1971. They had another son on Alexander, Christmas again in 73. And their third son was named Michel Trudeau, and he was born in October of 1975. 3 boys, bam, 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 all one after the other.
So you know what's interesting is, historically speaking, first ladies, no matter what country you focus on, have always stood by their husbands while they're in office and still serving. However,
she admitted herself to a psychiatric hospital, and the 5 years since then have been peppered with headlines.
They've used just about every cliche in the book to describe you at some stage or other. Which one's your favourite?
Scarlet woman.
Eccentric, Scarlet Woman.
Eccentric? Yeah,
The world's most eccentric first lady is always used to describe.
Yes.
How do you wear that?
With a good fit.
Do you think it's appropriate?
I don't know too many first ladies, but I'm sure they're all lovely, and I hope they're all happy.
What about the Scarlet Woman? You did raise it.
What about her? I think, as I described very honestly in my book, my marriage was broken down because we had a Catholic marriage based on the old-fashioned principle of fidelity, and I was unfaithful, and therefore our marriage was over. A one-night stand. It seems a shame, doesn't it?
Are you going to get divorced?
Well, doesn't matter to me, but I think that's the way things are done legally. I certainly wouldn't want to be a bigamist. I don't think I believe in bigamy.
Does that make you a thoughtless person?
No. You think all the time, but how seriously do you take your thoughts?
How seriously do you take yours?
Not very. I take very seriously my emotions and my instincts and my honesty and my integrity, but my thoughts, they play tricks on me.
Is that why people describe you as a scatterbrain, amongst other things?
Yes. I don't know. No, all the lonely people, where do they all?
It's difficult to know whether I'm talking to an estranged wife of the Canadian Prime Minister.
Strange wife.
Strange estranged wife. Or just a publicity-seeking, very beautiful young woman who doesn't really know what she wants.
No, yeah, dumb.
No, you're not dumb.
No.
But sometimes you do give the impression that you really don't know what you're about or what you really want.
No.
Do you?
No.
Will you go on like that?
Yeah.
now where does the Cuban factor come into play here? Because now people are going to say, well, how's that possible? She must have spent, a night in Havana?
People love, including the Canadian media, actually, many media outlets over the years, love to dismiss this Castro could be Justin's father rumor, as they put it, because they say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Justin was born in 71, and Pierre and Margaret didn't officially visit Cuba until 1976. So they just go, that's ridiculous, conspiracy theory. But the fact is actually that Pierre and Margaret, when they got married in the spring of 71, they had 2 honeymoons. The first one was here in Canada, but their second honeymoon took place all over the Caribbean. They were all over the place. They were in Barbados, among other places. So if they were jet setting and boating here and there all around the Caribbean islands, Barbados to Havana, Cuba is not a long flight. It's really not out of the question to say they could have met Fidel Castro on their second honeymoon without anyone knowing about it. It's very plausible, and the timing lines up perfectly. They were on their
Yeah.
honeymoon exactly 8.5 months before Justin was born. It's completely plausible, but
Well, you talk about Pierre Trudeau, and you talk about the resemblance of Pierre Trudeau and Justin, his TV son, and it's just not there. But if I were to make the case, like father, like son, well, you would have to get the right father. In this case, it would be Fidel Castro, and it's irrefutable. It's irrefutable.
it's a little
Absolutely
too similar, isn't it?
I mean, Justin Trudeau probably, on purpose, make sure he has to make sure he never has a mustache because it's uncanny, Kara, uncanny.
I used to be a barber, and I'll tell you right now, they grow the exact same mustache. Like the way that it grows, the pattern of the hair, where the hair starts and then stops, like they just kind of naturally both have the same growth pattern in their facial hair. And I really heavily noticed that with Justin's little brother, Michel, as well. That is
Wow.
the youngest Trudeau boy, Michel. And I think he bears a striking resemblance to Castro, maybe even more than Justin, which to me
Incredible.
makes Justin's case even stronger.
Let's talk about just not the uncanny resemblance of Justin Trudeau and now what's appearing to be his younger brother to the not TV dad, but Fidel Castro. There's got to be some connection in the DNA pool with Michel Trudeau and Fidel Castro, isn't there? I mean, because that's, lightning struck a few times in the 3 Nights in Havana tour, didn't it?
It would appear so. I mean, when I look at Michel and Castro, I just really think that's his son. And there's definitely some weirder connections with the two of those fellas as well. Not only did Fidel Castro show basically an immediate love for Michel as a baby in 1976 when his parents took him to Cuba for the visit, but Fidel never forgot about baby Michel either. A lot of people say that Justin grew up to look a hell of a lot like Castro, and I agree as well. But I see it even more in the youngest Trudeau brother, Michel. And there's some weird things going back with those two as well. Not only did Fidel Castro seem to show immediate love for Michel as a baby when his parents took him to Cuba for the political visit in 76, but it goes further than that. When Michel was 7 years old, Fidel Castro actually contacted Margaret and Pierre Trudeau to ask them if he could host Michel in Cuba with him so that Michel could attend Fidel Castro's pioneer camp for children in Cuba. That says a whole lot to me right there. Not only did Fidel want to take Michel, but he had no interest in the other Trudeau children. It was a very obvious bond with Michel.
Yeah, I mean, what a deal to go to pioneer camp with Fidel Castro. I don't think I could pass that up. So, you know what? So the case can be made that it's probably his other son in addition to Justin, couldn't it?
I mean, it begs the question, right? Because we all, at least most Canadians, if we're going to talk about this, we're talking about Justin being Castro's son. But for the most part, nobody thinks about Michel. And then it's strange that Fidel seems to show so much love for Michel, but none for Justin. I mean, of course, there's so many questions to that. I have several ideas. I mean, what if Margaret herself was not sure who the father of Justin was? Hey, it was the 70s. They were partying hard. What if Margaret herself didn't know this? Or what if maybe Margaret did know and it was just decided upon to never acknowledge that within the family? Plenty of kids have grown up thinking someone else is their father. It's not out of the question to wonder that either.
It probably would have been even more obvious had she went on a state visit to visit the Nigerian prince back then, who the father would have been. But
I mean, I could understand needing to keep something so scandalous a lifelong secret. She
yeah,
was such a political figure. Well, she was almost a celebrity in her own right, as far as we can have celebrities in Canada.
that's right. That's right. But, what happened to Michelle Trudeau? Because first time really for me and many, many Americans, if not people around the world hearing about it.
Well, I wish the story was not so sad, but unfortunately, Michel Trudeau died in 1998. of a skiing accident that I myself find a little suspicious, as do quite a few other people. The story goes that on November the 3rd, no, excuse me. The story goes that on Friday the 13th of November in 1998, Michel was on a skiing trip with some of his friends. And apparently, the narrative is an avalanche happened and it pushed only Michel and none of his friends into a nearby lake that they were hiking around. So if you can kind of picture, a mountain and a lake at the bottom, apparently they were hiking near the lake and an avalanche happened, but it only pushed Michel into the water, where he is officially presumed to have drowned. They never recovered the body of Michel Trudeau. And now this is the son of a former prime minister who was in power for years and years. It's incredibly suspicious to me that we never recovered the body of Michel. The lake is an alpine lake. It doesn't feed out into the ocean. A body is not going to just float away. And the lake is very cold all year round. It's Kokanee Lake in British Columbia is where this happened. The lake is cold all year round, which preserves a body very well. I mean, hey, we've all seen CSI. Cold water preserves a body a lot longer than a swampy area. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
It makes no sense to me. Also, at the time, the Avalanche Center, I'm pretty sure they're called, in BC, when the reporters called the Avalanche Center to be like, hey, do you have anything to say about this? They were very taken aback. These are the avalanche experts. And at the time, they were very taken aback and they said, we've never heard of that particular thing happening before. An avalanche just pushing one of you into a lake? That's incredibly strange. And it gets even weirder because the story keeps changing. I have read that there were 3 friends with him. I've read there were 4 friends with him. I've read there were 5 friends with him. I've read that the friends got rescued immediately the same day. And I've also read that the friends couldn't be rescued the same day and had to camp overnight and be rescued in the morning. Why can't anybody get their story straight? And why would the Canadian media never release the names of the people who were with him? That's the thing. We'll release the names of people involved with things as long as they're not under investigation for like an act of crime. If the friends were not suspects, we would have released that information of at least who their names were, or at least agree on how many friends were with him that day. There are so many questions in my mind. I wonder, is it possible that maybe Michel is not dead at all, but just wanted to be out of his life and he chose to go to Cuba and live with his real father? I think it's possible. Michel famously didn't enjoy his political family life. He liked to be outdoors. He liked to just be with nature. He wasn't about this whole political thing. He didn't enjoy it. I think it's not far-fetched at all.
Here's another telling thing, just to kind of maybe sunset this expedition we've been on that has taken us, just from Cuba and back to Canada. But you have Pierre Trudeau, the TV dad of Justin and others, the much older husband, who passes away now and dies right at the millennium. And you want to talk about a very telling just funeral and the people, attendees. Well, it's just this, and just that exactly is what it is. Well, here it is, Pierre Trudeau's funeral, October 2000. Well, you have Margaret, then you have Justin, and then, lo and behold, you have Fidel Castro, who, I got to tell you, Kara, I followed, somewhat the political career of Fidel Castro. I can't recall one time, and maybe I can name one on one hand, where Fidel Castro left Cuba to come to the West. And here we have just that taking place. How
there
telling
he is right
that?
there, mourning his dear friend Pierre. And you're right, he never left Cuba. He famously never left Cuba, if he could help it. So it really said numbers that he showed up here in Canada to mourn his close friend Pierre. And not only did he come to the funeral, but he in typical Fidel fashion, pissed off his security forces the night before because Fidel Castro wanted to pay such personal respects to Pierre that he took a little midnight run out to the gravesite where Pierre was to be buried the next day. And he didn't tell any of his security about this. He's Fidel Castro. He was just like, we're going here now. And none of the Canadian security was ready. None of his security was ready. All of a sudden, Fidel's just on a visit to the graveyard to go see where his friend is going to be buried tomorrow. So that to me, wow, they were very, very close, him and Pierre. And him and Margaret were definitely close too. And we see some evidence of that at Pierre Trudeau's funeral. Before the funeral began, on the steps of the church, Fidel Castro spoke with reporters, and he actually shared with one reporter a gift that he had brought for Margaret. Now, yes, Margaret was a grieving widow. She had just lost her son, Michel, 2 years before in 1998, and now it's 2000, and Pierre is dead. So, of course, she's grieving. But Fidel Castro shared with a reporter that he had brought a very close personal gift for Margaret. He brought with him photos from his personal collection of himself and Michel Trudeau over the years. Now, all we really officially know is that they met when Michel was a baby on that visit in 1976. But on the steps of Pierre Trudeau's funeral, Fidel Castro told a reporter he brought with him personal photos from his personal collection of Fidel Castro and Michel Trudeau over the years. And he also remarked to the reporter, look at this photo. Look, Michel in this photo is taller than me. So that means Michel met with Castro at least one more time over his life. And then Fidel went on to say, young Michel visited Cuba 3 times, and Pierre, his father, visited Cuba 4. So Fidel Castro himself said Michel has been to Cuba 3 times, and he had photos of himself and Michel over the years. And these were not family vacation photos. This was not the whole Trudeau family visiting with Fidel. No. This was just Michel and Fidel over the years together. And Fidel gave these to Margaret on the steps of the church, and then the two of them shared what witnesses call a very long and warm and close embrace. And it really made it apparent to the people witnessing this that Fidel Castro and Margaret Trudeau had a much deeper bond with each other than what we're supposed to believe, that they met once in 1976. That's not the case.
No, it sounds like they were more than just pen pals. I mean, it all stems back to this. You know, you can't escape from what your eyes and clear common sense and logic tell you. And I'm sure in the or I should say in the wake of the death of Pierre Trudeau, I'm sure his first love right there, Maggie, and Fidel probably reconciled on some level together as well. So this is quite the stunning turn of events and a plot twist. I think I've counted 3, kind of in a closing nature here, Kara, because you have really shared and opened up a bit of your heart and your research. What do you think it's going to take for the Canadian people who are watching this here tonight, who just saw a presentation and the case be made here? What's it going to take for them to actually finally say, okay, this is not what it seems? Is it what we did here tonight? Does Canada have to sink further into its own footprint? What do you think? Does this have the legs to convince the masses here?
That's a good question. I think the older folks, it takes no problem to convince them of this because they seem to have known all along. The younger people are having an easier and easier time believing that they are not who they say they are. But yeah, that remains to be seen, doesn't it?
Kind of in closing, what is you personally learning all this as a Canadian, as a researcher? What is your takeaway from everything you've learned during this time?
Everywhere I turn, I keep finding lawyers and politicians, and lawyers who turned into politicians, and famous people who have either lawyer or politician parents. And now I just question everything. I question who everyone is. I probably question too many things now. But for me, I wonder if anyone is who they say they are in this dog and pony show that we call a government.
The silver spoon you grew up with in your mouth is going to end up your ass.
The amount of damage that Justin Trudeau has done to our country and our image of our country and our perception of our country, at this point might be irreparable. It might be the coup de grace of the patriotism and the respect and the goodwill that we've built over literal generations of Canadians that are far superior to his intellect and abilities. He's destroyed in basically, a couple of years. It's appalling. I can't express in enough words and enough time how incompetent, corrupt, and distasteful this person is, and how much destruction he's done to our society and our country. If I could give one word to Justin Trudeau, it would have to be something like less than dirt, like the worst scum, the most treasonous, traitorous loser. If somebody declares war on you, you have to fight or you lose, and you've been declared war on.
The people of planet Earth, Canadians, my fellow Americans, we got this. We got this. And what we have to remember is that I'm not in charge. You're not in charge. Dean's not in charge. The Almighty, the one above us, is in charge.
Justin Trudeau, I voted for you in 2015. I was a paying member of the Liberal Party of Canada. I had great pleasure on cutting up my party card. If you do the right thing, Mr. Trudeau, step down. You've broken the law. You were caught several times breaking the law, and nothing has been done. It's time for you to go, Mr. Trudeau. You're a fucking scumbag.
We have just been on an incredible excursion here on this jungle cruise and really getting to know your lineage. And I mean the true lineage, not the Wikipedia highlighted spoon-fed lineage, the true nature of your family tree. And my takeaway is that it's not necessarily like father, like son. No, the psychopathy doesn't necessarily begin with Fidel Castro, but Margaret Trudeau. Her little excursion in several nights in Havana on multiple occasions gave us the divine mistake yourself. And from that, it has brought Canada a reign of terror and a dark-seated cloud of deceit, dare I say death, on your watch, with blood on your hands, just like your true father. With the help of the TV dad, Pierre Trudeau, who really brought a Western-styled, disguised communism of this Canadian so-called socialism to the forefront, and ultimately gave the platform to you to be installed by your other dad, Klaus Schwab, to bring one of the most sophisticated forms of communism, and it's called globalism. It's a corporate model that has been embedded in society and has been decaying society for decades. You have no empathy, no remorse, no conscience, and you have taught the people of Canada that you can certainly vote your way out of capitalism, free markets, free thought, free ideas. But you certainly can't do that with communism, especially the corporate kind. And that's why the problems of Canada have now become the problems of the United States and ultimately North America. And as the world is watching the incredible, accelerated, brazen nature of this very limp-wristed, light-in-the-pants character called Justin Trudeau, but really Justin Castro, as the world is watching this wonderful film, the reign of your terror that has now engulfed North America. The world is also watching the Canadian people, and they're waiting to see if the Canadian people are finally going to stand up to this monstrosity that has now plagued your nation. So the polite society, the polite nature of Canadians is a thing of the past because you have been brought to the slaughterhouse in stealth. And one of the questions is, what are you going to do about it? If freedom truly is the answer, then what is the question? Because if you're waiting for a leader, you're going to get a master. And last time I checked, Justin Castro, he ain't my master, nor was he ever anybody's leader. Before you defeat the enemy, you have to know the enemy. You have to know how they came to power, how they came to be, what are their principalities, weaknesses, what's their DNA. But now we know. Now we know, don't we? I consider Justin Trudeau an enemy of the people of Canada. But now I consider Justin Trudeau an enemy of the United States. And we will do to him what we've done to all of the despots of the 20th century. We will bring them to task for sedition and treason, because the amount of treason is so thick, it's blinding. It's blinding. But you know what else is blinding? The amount of anger and the amount of unity that is growing around Canada and the United States and the rest of the world. And I can honestly say, nowhere in my lifetime have I ever felt, seen, and experienced the amount of unity Americans have with Canadians more than I do in present day. And that should tell you something. That should tell you something. The people are awakened. And you push the people to the brim, to the edge, and you push hard, and you push big, we're going to get a big response. That I can tell you. From the wild child, humble beginnings of the mother, the flower power, the free will and spirit, the selfishness has now been drawn and injected into you. So Trudeau may be used to such a little slap on the wrist. He was probably promised immunity, protection from his global masters. But behind every blade of grass is a pissed off American with a self-defense weapon. We can now include our fellow Canadians in that category. Well, until next time, I'm Dean Ryan, reminding you, never underestimate your power and never give it away. And always remember, stay tuned and stay awake. Good night, everybody.